Well, as people have been registering to vote throughout the weekend, we thought we would take the time here on The Full View to discuss exactly what is going to be happening and what has been happening in our elections over the last few years. We have two guests with us. We're going to continue our conversation with them now and continue going through the provinces of South Africa as we look at some of that data. Professor Ivor Sarakinsky is from the Wits School of Governance, and Angelo Fick is from the Auwal, Director of Research at the Auwal Socio-economic Research Institute. Gentlemen, thank you so much for staying on. We spoke about symbolism a little earlier, and I want to talk about the Eastern Cape in particular, because that was where the metro named Nelson Mandela Bay was lost to the opposition. Still technically, I suppose, in opposition hands. The mayor there is a member of the United Democratic Movement. But Angelo, the ANC is also used to be the ANC's heartland. It is where, in some ways, the ANC is from. Nelson Mandela, Govan Mbeki, I could go on. And yet, in some ways, there's been difficulties in some parts of the Eastern Cape, but no one seriously predicts that there'll be any threat to the party now.
No, because what I do when I look at the Eastern Cape is divided into two, which is the eastern half of the Eastern Cape, which is, sort of hampered by the issues of having inherited two homelands and is the ANC heartland. And then the western half of the Eastern Cape, which is really a sort of lopped-off version of the Western Cape rural hinterland, so the Southern Cape, in other words. And there, I think the Nelson Mandela Bay loss was a significant blow, but as we've seen, not being able to keep it was also another moment of political failure by the official opposition in National Assembly, but what was then the coalition government major partner, the Democratic Alliance. And I think those internal dynamics of the Eastern Cape have to do with those corruption issues on the ground, so textbook failure delivery, school issues, education issues, transport issues, but also the, we've seen that the big split off from the ANC in the mid-2000s, which was COPE, had a strong showing in that first election and then collapsed. So this is also about sustaining the ties with the province, sustaining relationships with the province. And here, patronage politics does play a big role, because this is also the place in which we've, seen the hijacking of tenders happening in huge spaces, in lots and lots of spaces.
There's an interesting figure, well, he won't thank me for putting it like that, but there's a very interesting political history of Bantu Holomisa.
Yes.
Someone who came from a homeland, supported the ANC, helped the ANC where he could, and Professor was sort of part of it and then got thrown out. And the UDM consistently, despite being a small party, just doesn't seem to lose a percentage point.
Yes. He clearly has a way of engaging communities in the areas where he knows he has support and keeping them on board, and he's very careful in the way he engages on national issues. His interventions are very subtle, but they're very there, and he's quite skilled at undermining the ANC on a range of issues in terms of keeping that constituency on board. So I think he'll remain more or less constant, might go up 1 or 2 points. He might be damaged by the coalition that's emerged as dominant in Nelson Mandela Bay now, because there seems to be shenanigans with the UDM being involved there. But he's going to be around, he'll always be in Parliament, and that's what is a good thing about a PR system. It enables those kinds of personalities to be in the national institution, to have some say on affairs, because he is quite sensible on a range of issues.
He's had a say on quite a number of issues on the national scale of debate. I know he was quite instrumental on the issues relating to the PIC. If we look at, I grew up in the Eastern Cape in Mthatha, so at a time when I was growing up, you had the UDM quite strong within that particular area. What is it going to take for the UDM to resuscitate itself? Because yes, he's a member of Parliament, but on the issues, if you look at where the UDM stands now in comparison to a decade ago, there's a vast difference. What could have gone wrong for the UDM, and how can it resuscitate itself?
In the same way that COPE disintegrated with personality changes at the top, the failure of UDM to have that co-leadership role, which was there right at the beginning, in order to have a broader appeal than just narrow constituencies in the Eastern Cape. The failure of that, I think, has hindered it from building a strong national presence. And that's just the way the politics falls. Rolf Meyer could have brought a range of national voters in had he stayed in that alliance.
On the issues of, can we move to Limpopo?
Yeah, we can move.
Look, the ANC has got its own internal politics as well in Limpopo. How could that fare for the ANC in the next election? I mean, you're still dealing with issues at the moment where infighting in that particular province as well, as we see it, could be quite damaging for it, perhaps.
There's some tough issues in Limpopo. You've got the Vuyani issue with the municipal demarcation, and the chiefs involved in that might tell their subjects not to vote in order to put pressure on rearranging the municipal demarcation there. At the same time, Limpopo is a strong EFF area, and one would want to see how the EFF can bolster its support from 2014 through sustained campaigning in that province.
Just very quickly, VBS, the VBS Bank, VBS. How would that then play a critical, because you had accusations against the EFF, alleged involvement in that, and the ANC clearly seeming to want to be seen to be taking action with the firing of all of those mayors, but many are saying that's not enough. Talk to us very briefly about how those dynamics could play out.
Well, the EFF, the ANC fired their mayors in order to put pressure on the EFF. Otherwise, they wouldn't have put pressure on those mayors. And we've seen that with the Bosasa inaction compared to the strong action on the VBS issue. So we've got some cynical politics being played out there. The EFF is denying. To show that they're involved is a complicated case. It's not straightforward. It's through fronts and this and that. And I think the EFF is going to deny, and hope to get away with as much as possible on that one.
Can we start to sum up the national picture a little bit now? So Angelo, an awful lot has happened since 2014. And yet if you look at the polls, we could actually almost end up exactly where we were in 2014. The ANC could still be well above 60%. The DA might even lose a little bit of support. The EFF, it seems to be difficult to know. It seems to change from poll to poll. But it looks like we could almost end up where we were 5 years ago.
That is one possibility. Another possibility is that voters surprise you and do all sorts of things that would have to then be explained retroactively once, the election results are in. I think if we end up with the same situation or similar situation to 2014, it's partly, one, the consequence of opposition party failures. It would have been that the opposition parties had their own internal dynamics between 2014 and now that caused them not to build on whatever gains they made between 2009 and 2014. And that's a real indictment because the ANC has certainly given them enough material to work with. Between the Nkandla and the State Capture Commission, there's been enough going on. We've had, VBS, we've had the Vuwani scandal, we've also had the Life Isidimeni tragedy, which the DA is trying to exploit, but it's doing so in a very, shall we sort of say, badly managed, poorly coordinated manner. That this has to be consistent between elections, that one has to consistently be there present in, and so communities begin to see that you are paying attention to their local issues. And I think that that's been one significant failure of the opposition parties. It's one thing to go for the easy national public target of corruption. It's something else altogether to start getting into what is affecting a community on the ground, which could include corruption, but will change their lives on the ground.
Professor Sarakinsky, I remember, I think it was 10 years ago, in 2009, the ANC got, I think, 90% in Mpumalanga. It's now sitting on just over 78% in 2014. I mean, that shows that it's just insurmountable. I mean, no one's going to, they're just not going to lose in Mpumalanga for a long time, despite some headlines we've seen in the New York Times recently.
Yes. The thing to watch, I think, in some of the stronghold provinces and areas is the turnout rate. So the ANC might win, but with reduced turnout. And I think that the turnout is an indication in terms of voter confidence of the ANC and other parties at the same time. And that might be the real significance of the 2019 election, is public confidence in parties to represent them at various levels of government. And I think they'll be speaking with their feet by not going to the polls. And we need to watch that number more than what the ANC or the DA or the EFF gets. It's what is the percentage of eligible voters who registered who didn't go. And my guess is that number is going to be on a downward curve.
A downward curve?
An upward curve.
For the ANC? For
voter participation.
For voter participation. Yeah. If you look at the Democratic Alliance, just at 10%, do you think that some of the scandals in Mpumalanga could perhaps take away some of the support of those who would possibly vote for the ANC in that particular region?
Mpumalanga is very difficult to predict because it's not simply free citizens making a free voluntary choice. There are complicated local dynamics in terms of how warlords and power brokers corral people into the political system. And you see that with the number of branches that suddenly appeared just before the Nasrec conference for the ANC. So there's a major local power play there that could insulate the ANC from losing votes and support by the exercise of overt pressure. We focus on KZN for violent politics. Mpumalanga is another province where that kind of violence is far too prevalent.
Professor Ivor Sarakinsky from the Wits School of Governance, Angelo Fick, Director of Research at the Auwal Socio-economic Research Institute. Thank you very much indeed for joining us tonight on The Full View. Really do appreciate it. You can go to sabcnews.com if you missed anything and would like to watch this particular conversation again.
Well, we'll be back straight after this break.